Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Today, Mary Ann McFadden will read her poetry, and then she'll read Adrienne Rich's poetry and talk about her. Mary Ann McFadden's first book, Eye of the Blackbird, won the Four-Way Books Intro Award for Poetry in 1995. Her second book was Devil Deer, published by Alice James Books in 2014. McFadden taught English and poetry at Brooklyn College, CUNY, then left New York City for 14 years, living in Mexico. In 2010, she was awarded a MacDowell Fellowship, and that same year, several poems were set to music and performed at the Carnegie Center in New York. Returning to California in 2012, McFadden now lives in rural Ventura County and is finishing a third book. Here's a wonderful poet, Mary Ann McFadden.
Thank you, Harry. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me here today. It's great. So I'm thrilled to be reading Adrienne Rich. She's a great hero of mine and of all women who read poetry or who are feminists. And I'm excited to get to that part of the reading. I thought I would start because reading my first book, which I don't read from very often anymore, I feel connected to Adrienne Rich when I read this, partly because of the subject matter. And so I'm going to start with just the opening section. And Harry, I would just ask you, if the 25 minutes is drawing to a close, to give me a 2 or 3 minutes heads up, okay? I've got a clock here, but sometimes I forget to look. So, all right. So this is Eye of the Blackbird. And my father died right at the end of World War II. And I didn't know him. And partly what this book does is I imagine a history with him that I didn't know very much about. So so I'll just read it's 3 or 4 poems in the beginning. It's all one long poem, really. In the eye of the blackbird, flying toward Sinaloa Lake, returning with thousands from the aged cottonwood by the drainage ditch to the field, to the poppied slope, over the house toward the horse barn, in short bursts toward the willow swamp, our lives will flash for a moment and be forgotten. What the blackbird won't forget is which tree, which branch will hold him. There is a cottonwood bordering the lake. Its broad leaf blades grow at right angles to their slender petioles, so that any breeze sets them in motion. The red wings fly into it in flocks of 14 or 20, more and more filling it until every branch is heavy. Now and then a little wind opens the tree like a shuttered window, and I can see the birds lined up on every twig. An hour, and still the birds keep coming. Another flock enters the tree, and a few birds fly out the other side to circle around and enter again. Then 20 birds rise out of the tree, veer into the swamp, and disappear. Another flock rises, and another, and another. And while the tree is emptying, the willows, nut trees, pepper trees with their papery strands and pink peppercorns sweeping the ground, all these stand hollow and alone. Though I know that what I've seen is a gift, something I'll always remember, and though I feel blessed, I keep wondering, why this tree? Why not one of the others? In Hattiesburg, Mississippi, in hot, humid June, my grandmother steps off the Southern Pacific Railroad train into the soft oven blast of midday into the juicy greens of fields cooking, distance and close, the cicada ring like air, like consciousness. The town is swollen with men and officers, officers' wives in cotton dresses, dew on their upper lips, handkerchiefs at the ready. Along the teeming, intersecting streets, she comes toward me, my grandmother. Love and strength flaming around her, radiant, purple-hued, tanned, nut-brown Dorothy. And somewhere in the west, a letter is moving toward me, jostling in a mail sack, passing from hand to hand, written in pencil, 4 pages of my grandfather's flourishing alphabet. At Sinaloa Ranch, a familiar hand is writing to me the first of the letters I will love all my life. Dear Mary Ann, how are you getting along by now, and what do you think of it all? I am 10 days old. As I lie on my rectangular bed of light, I can see the letters form, however distant, however close, and everything, the weight of myself against the sheet, the chafing paper diaper, the way my head is turned, one eye pressed shut, the uppermost eye watching the movement. Without language, what I know, limitless. Shapes advance and retreat in the room, and in the streets, armies, and in Africa, and in the south of France. I can see the German soldier in his muddy coat, his tired blue eyes, his regretful mouth, the cracked hands and the torn fingernails as he lifts the mortar shell that will kill my father and slides it into the barrel. Ach, Gott, he hates this war. Flying through space, silent, thoughtful, the sperm, the mortar shell. The startled hawk, poised in uprising air, circles higher and higher. The green fields of France, the shining river, the bridge from one side to the next that so many will be killed for. The mountains rise toward their mute white crowns. The plains sink toward the sea. To the south I spy a whole lot of rain and little puffs of cannon smoke and fires there, away toward the Pyrenees. The orchards are so graceful, the way they curve along the foothills, and from that dark soil, heat rises in a column of air, predictable, formal. See, over the ocean, a great cloud lets down her milk in falls and funnels that sweep across the little ships, the thirsty islands. How many times did they touch in their brief life together? How many times to get me? In and out of a cloud, the hot shell whistles. The steelhead flings its pink meat up the waterfall, battered, its skin in rags. Faithful, it is so faithful. And when the eggs are laid and fertile, feathered into the gravel, you can't count all the bodies washed up on the rocks. You can't describe the smell of the rot. Even the dogs won't eat it now. What does he think? The long-legged young man who loves to fish in the small lakes and streams of the Sierra Nevada, who stands for hours rocking the old canoe, sending the broad ripples over the water as he whips his wrist, slipping the line out, back and forward, silent in focus, until the mosquitoes rise, prickling his face, and smoke from the cabin spins into the chilled, delicious. And in the woods at night, on the way to the outhouse, there are bears, and under the rocks along the stream, periwinkles. Here as there. He must be thinking that. Here as there. He wants to go home to his mother and father, to the pink belly of his pup, to the young wife he barely knows, to their whole life looming beyond them just out of reach, the child like some unknown sun blinding him with love, even now, over this distance. He wants their little house, the wild mustard greens they picked, the ice creams they cranked, Summers at the lake, 17 cousins posing for his camera, lined up like trout. After this damned war is over, I'd like to come back with time to walk and watch for birds, to talk to the farmers about this land, tilled for centuries. I'd like to come back to these woods in peace, to picnic, to be able to laugh at all this, or if not to laugh, to talk it over, lying on our backs among cheeses and sandwiches on a white tablecloth. Down his whole length, he remembers her skin, the transparent flesh around her eyes, the phosphorescent plates of her skull beating beneath it. What is it she knows? And her breasts, which drive him, into which he wants to swim or fly. Some molecular grief longing for her, but she won't let him. Why? Sometimes he has kissed her and felt her falling apart in his arms, and he has opened his eyes to see if she was there and gone on kissing her, belly and thigh. And at the last moment, she pushed him away, as if he were not this fragrant face, as if he were a beast or a stranger. And he slept, aching into the night beside her, and waked in the morning as if it were ordinary. And they have talked at breakfast and chewed their toast and passed the butter. What can have happened to her? Why is she afraid of crossing over into that sexual spray which makes of us one pilgrim? When I get home, I'll make love to her more quietly, he tells himself, stopping always short of what I think she fears, dwelling there a while until she invites me further. The dust rises and swirls away into the weeds. Granite fragments rain on the palmate leaves. The thick corners of the farmhouse kneel in ruins. Tatters of maps still smoldering. A tin cup shines 100 yards away. What has become of his face? His fine, light brown hair waving, the hands that held the jackknife firmly, splitting the light yellow pine of the lemon crate into thin kite sticks, the hands that notched and bent the bow and knotted the strong string. All over the earth, we miss him. Our waters, rocks, birds, our children throb with sudden loss. We look up from the ground as he passes over us. We do not know what it is. A sudden thrill, a shock, the sense of something hidden, some movement, ripple, and unfocusing. A thought or shining thing catches us, startles us. Our flesh rises, hair lifts. We gasp. We look behind us. We look around us at nothing, at beauty, lasting out of every crack and crevice, sharp and terrible, muted, unreachable. We look away. We go on breathing. We do not know him. His eyes dim. The bodily fluids, the ferment and rot leak out of him. The insects cloud. The earth prepares itself, knowing how fruit falls. The earth marshals its worms, its ants, its shining beetles. The earth opens its grains to accept him drop by drop, gulping, greedy, ringing, silent, sleeping. So that's the first part of that. And then in this book, I'll read first page 32, Like Candles. Thinking on this rainy day of old lovers, like candles blown out on a cake. I hate how life shrinks the huge fish I caught and photographed, which 10 years later looks like a small perch. And the house I lived in once, with its vaulted rooms, which turns out to be quite ordinary. even the ranch, which was my universe, caught by a backward glance from the new highway at 70 miles per hour as I speed toward my death, is just a dimple in the hills, tilted and spinning away into space. And the breasts, the areolas I woke to touch, the fragrances, the silks and secrets, the bell voice breaking over me like morning light. The fried egg, happy on its plate, surfaces for a moment and slips away. I don't know why, now my life is steady as a train on its track. I regret what I lost. Like a coin tossed into a river of cash, a dime I held and warmed in my fist. I traded that for this. Okay, Night Windows. This poem, probably more than any, speaks to the reason why I write. And it refers to a painting by the same name, the painting by Edward Hopper called Night Windows. But it's also the title of the poem. The neighbors are making love again. Their side, resonant cries drawn out unexpectedly, honestly, into a summer night that was longing for them, waiting to be filled. My cats stir and shift on their pillows. And if, at an exhibition, I am struck dumb standing in front of Hopper's Night Windows, it is not by the half-dressed woman or the breeze that flies out of the painting and lifts my hair, but by the love that renders them and strips them bare. My own loves and failures, of which even now it is difficult to speak, have been forgiven here. I can go on. I am not unlike the happy man next door. I can hear him whistling in the shower. And let's see. This is called Did You Ever? Did you ever walk past the house of someone you wanted to know, admire the yard, glimpse figures waltzing inside the windows? If you've been a long time at sea or lost anywhere at all, you understand the hope I feel when I open a book I've begun. I'm looking for a port, a friendship, a meal, an erotic coupling. And it can't be rushed, like space travel, light years, until the poems are part of my breathing. Like galaxies, they contract and expand. One, hidden behind the bright face of the one before it, goes unnoticed, and then shy mouse catches my attention. Now and again, I see mistakes the poet made. Not mistakes, but blurts, egoistic slips, or failures of nerve. Little cracks in the verse through which I enter, through which the poem gives birth. There was a poet, now dead, who in life I loved from afar. Not love, it was infatuation. What else could it have been from such a distance? Though we did take a few meals together and kissed once or twice. I dreamed he humbly came to me. We'd begun together at last. But I awoke before the love scene, awoke in my mosquito net, bestirred by the overhead fan, pushed myself up to feed the cats, and so the day began. But we met. Beloved man, we met again. I didn't know what I wanted. It's so much easier, isn't it, to please someone else than to say, wait, not yet. I'm not certain. He was such a rake. What would I have meant to him? I wanted to believe I would be the one he grew to comprehend once he had failed with all the others, as I had failed with others, though not that many times. I bring my conflicting emotions to the books I read, and sometimes the words take fire. As yesterday, I was seethingly envious as a poem I wished to have written turned and finally brought me shriven into its arms. Let's see, a couple more minutes. Okay, I'm going to read a couple of recent poems. This is called On Tuttle Creek Road, Thanksgiving Day. We passed a dozen steers in a field of snow. They had gathered to eat fresh hay spread on the ice, green alfalfa packed in bales and flaked into thick cakes. Each winter morning, the man and his boy lift it down from the truck and rake it out. The steers chew and swallow. Their 4 stomachs digest even the weeds that horses can't eat. What do they think as they chew, as their jaws rotate slowly and their molars grind and their juices flow? When dairy cows are loosed from a winter barn on the first warm day of spring, they leap and twist and their udders swing like clouds. Only women in the fields that day, no business with the bull, just gray-pink tits and buds of blue clover. These are Black Angus, castrated males, just boys really, raised for their meat. Around them the snow is heaped on the fence posts, canyons deep, avalanche poised on the far slope. The herd huddled together in the dark. They lay down to protect their bellies, stayed down all night. Now they get up. Crusts of snow slide off their level backs. They scrape with their hooves. They gather together at the place where their feed is spread so that everyone can eat, so that everyone here can eat.
We have about 5 minutes left, Mary Ann, for your section.
Okay. Let's see. Well, I just have one left. I'll read that because the other one is a little longer. Okay. I went to visit friends up in Lone Pine, and then we drove up to the White Mountains where the bristlecone pine are. And they are the oldest living non-cloning trees on Earth. And one in particular, they think is the very oldest, and its name is Methuselah. And I'm just sure that Methuselah was a woman, at least in this case. Bristlecone pine and Methuselah. Her sprout broke the glacial ice. Oh, I should say she's over 5,000 years old, this tree, and still alive. Her sprout broke the glacial ice, held where few beasts could reach her. 5,000 years passed. Soft skies whiffed, seasons snapped. Pyramids, civilizations hopped and skipped. Vast armies sparked. And yet, the life in her pressed. And still, the thick sap urges upward, in a single living strip of bark. The eons in her wood arrest. She stands, anchored in adamant. Her years ring thinner than the thinnest paper. She stood at the making of our clay tablets and stands now at the end of books.
That was wonderful, Mary Ann. I love the way you create, almost like you create time, and your poetry is so comforting, and it almost puts me in a reverie. And I love the way you have a sense of the real physical. I mean, you put us right there with you. Before we move on to Adrienne Rich, I would just like to ask you to take a minute and just talk about, your perspective, how you locate yourself, where do you put your focus. Let's just take one poem of yours, Night Windows. Where were you, when you wrote that poem, was it during the time that what was happening in the poem was happening, or was it a reflection? How do you write a poem, and what do you focus on? For example, focusing on that one.
Well, I always write afterwards, after the events, because I find that when something's actually happening, it goes by too quick, and I kind of need to put it in perspective first. And also I find, and I don't write things down, I don't take notes, because I find if it's important, I do remember it. And then in the writing, I noticed the coincidence between the Night Windows that I actually had heard a few nights before, the people making love in the next house over, and the title of the painting. That was kind of a coincidence. It just happened in the writing of it, and but it brought together the meaning of the poem, which was that I write to kind of redeem myself. For what? I don't know. I haven't been that bad, but it just feels important to me to put things down, to save them. I think most poets write for that reason.
Well, I always love the real physical details and your sense of nature and love. And just to use 3 words from one of your earlier pieces you read today, the love and strength. You have so much love and strength in your poetry, and there's so much clarity. So I want to thank you very much for your wonderful reading. And before I introduce Adrienne Rich, I just want to say a couple things about women's poetry, if I may. When I was studying poetry in college, many decades ago, over 5 decades ago, the 3 main women poets that we studied, and this at Northridge, were Sylvia Plath, Anne Sexton, and Adrienne Rich. They weren't my favorite. I mean, I love all of them. I mean, my favorites were H.D., Anne Stanford, and Holly Prado. But I love the other 3 too for their greatness. But I remember thinking about Sylvia Plath, and she was classical, literary, dramatic, and she got all of our attention early. And then Anne Sexton, who's my favorite out of those 3, she would use those simple 1 and 2 syllable Anglo-Saxon words, and she put the body into the poem. Mm-hmm. And she broke taboos, and she was very important. And just a brief thing about her, when she was in an institution early in her life, she was in many years she was in institutions, she was always looking for meaning. And the doctor, I believe his name was Dr. Martin, told her, God is in your typewriter. And, that was always very illuminating to me. And then Adrienne Rich, to me, what she did was she reclaimed language for women. Out of all of them, out of all the poets in our time, she was the most revolutionary. And so I think in years to come, Adrienne Rich, will probably, maybe after HD, at least from my way of thinking, she may be the most important poet, women's poet. I mean, she's up there equally among men, maybe greater. But those were just a couple things from me in terms of my observation about them. I learned from all of them. And here's a little bit about Rich. Adrienne Rich was famous as an American poet, essayist, and feminist. She was called, quote, one of the most widely read and influential poets of the second half of the 20th century, end of quote. She was awarded the National Book Award for Poetry, the Ruth Lilly Poetry Prize, and a MacArthur Fellowship, and others too numerous to list here. Rich was educated at Radcliffe College and Harvard University. And one thing I noticed about her too, there's a great, sometimes she might seem abstract later on in her work, but there's a great musicality in Rich's poetry, which I love. Here's Mary Ann McFadden to read Adrienne Rich's poetry and talk about her.
Okay, thank you. It's just interesting to me. Carolyn Kaiser, who was my mentor, used to comment rather sardonically on the best way to become famous as a woman poet is to commit suicide. And the first two of those that you mentioned, of course, were suicides. And it seems, this may sound harsh, but it seems a little more acceptable for a woman if she kills herself. It's just, it romanticizes her somehow, And she encouraged us with all her heart to become, if we must, boozy old women poets and write those poems right along, right along. Don't give up, don't stop. And I know Adrienne Rich would have agreed very strongly with that. I really can't say enough about Adrienne Rich. She, when this book that I'm going to be reading from, which is Dream of a Common Language, it's the one I know best, came out, it was revelatory, not only for women who love women, lesbians like myself, but for all women, because she was a feminist, but she also was for the weak and the underprivileged and for the hungry. She really thought in terms of a cultural revolution, a worldwide revolution in the way we think and in the way we treat our poor and our underserved. And she was formidable. Someone who knew her told me she has a mind like a steel trap, and it was true. And so one of the things that she does, one of the ideas that comes through in her poems is an idea that was shared by Audre Lorde. Audre Lorde wrote, and I'm sure she did it, she showed it to Adrienne Rich, a little known tract called The Uses of the Erotic. The Erotic is Power. And that's an idea that Adrienne Rich also used in many of her poems, that the erotic, it wasn't just about sex between two people, male or female or two women, but it was the erotic as a way of claiming yourself and your power in a much larger way. And she writes about that extensively in these poems. I'm going to read first. It's one of her later poems, but I just have to read it first because I love it so much. And it's short. And some of the other ones I read are a little more, maybe a little more difficult. The Hubble Photographs after Sappho. She wrote it in 2005. So it's based on the Hubble photographs. It should be the most desired sight of all. The person with whom you hope to live and die, walking into a room, turning to look at you sight for sight. Should be, yet I say there is something more desirable. The ecstasis of galaxies. So out from us, there's no vocabulary, but mathematics and optics. Equations letting sight pierce through time into liberations, lacerations of light and dust, exposed like a body's cavity, violet, green, livid, and veinous, gorgeous, beyond good and evil, as ever stained into dream, beyond remorse, disillusion, fear of death or life, rage for order, rage for destruction, beyond this love which stirs the air every time she walks into the room. These impersonae, however we call them, won't invade us as on movie screens. They are so old, so new, we are not to them. We look at them or don't from within the milky gauze of our tilted gazing. But they don't look back, and we cannot hurt them. And since you gave me permission to talk about her just a little bit, I want to call attention to those last lines and how she flips the metaphor. These impersonae, however we call them, won't invade us as on movie screens. They are so old, so new. We are not. It's N-O-T, not N-A-U-G-H-T. By saying not to them, there's an absence there. But if you said they are not N-A-U-G-H-T, you name it in a way. So she creates the absence she's talking about by using that word in that way. And she's so brilliant at doing things like that. But then the last lines, they are so old, so new, we are not to them. We look at them or don't from within the milky gauze of our tilted gazing. But they don't look back, and we cannot hurt them. The milky, of course, the Milky Ways and the galaxies appear tilted in the heavens, and yet she turns it, she flips it. It's the milky gauze of our tilted gazing, as if we were children looking up. But they don't look back, and we cannot hurt them. I read that last line as the most tragic condemnation of humankind. That her biggest gratitude in the last phrase is that there's something we can't ruin, you know, that they're so beyond that, of course. And it's obvious, and it is, but the way she says it says so much more than the words actually literally say. They don't look back, and we cannot hurt them. I find that so powerful and so beautiful. Okay, so with great pleasure, I'm going to read first the Fantasia for Elvira Shatayev. And it explains a little bit here. She was leader of the women's climbing team, all of whom died in a storm on Lemon Peak, August 1974. I remember seeing that in the news. Later, Shatayev's husband found and buried the bodies. So she writes in the voice of Elvira Shatayev. And she writes from the dead, from the place of death in Elvira's voice. It's a powerful poem. The cold felt cold until our blood grew colder. Then the wind died down and we slept. If in this sleep I speak, It's with a voice no longer personal. I want to say with voices. When the wind tore our breath from us at last, we had no need of words. For months, for years, each one of us had felt her own yes growing in her, slowly forming as she stood at windows, waited for trains, mended her rucksack, combed her hair. What we were to learn was simply what we had up here. As out of all words, that yes gathered its forces, fused itself, and only just in time to meet a no of no degrees, the black hole sucking the world in. I feel you climbing toward me, your cleated boot soles. She's speaking to her husband here. I feel you climbing toward me, your cleated boot soles leaving their geometric bite colossally embossed on microscopic crystals, as when I trailed you in the Caucasus. Now I am further ahead than either of us dreamed anyone would be. I have become the white snow packed like asphalt by the wind. The women I love, lightly flung against the mountain. That blue sky, our frozen eyes unribboned. Through the storm, we could have stitched that blueness together like a quilt. You come, I know this, with your love, your loss, strapped to your body with your tape recorder, camera, ice pick, against advisement to give us burial in the snow. And in your mind, while my body lies out here, flashing like a prism into your eyes, how could you sleep? You climbed here for yourself. We climbed for ourselves. When you have buried us, told your story, ours does not end. We stream into the unfinished, the unbegun, the possible. Every cell's core of heat pulsed out of us into the thin air of the universe, the armature of rock beneath these snows, this mountain, which has taken the imprint of our minds through changes elemental and minute, as those we underwent to bring each other here, choosing ourselves, each other, and this life, whose every breath and grasp and further foothold is somewhere still enacted and continuing. In the diary I wrote, now we are ready, and each of us knows it. I have never loved like this. I have never seen my own forces so taken up and shared and given back. After the long training, the early sieges, we are moving almost effortlessly in our love. In the diary, as the wind began to tear at the tents over us, I wrote, we know now we have always been in danger, down in our separateness, and now up here together. But till now, we had not touched our strength. In the diary torn from my fingers, I had written, what does love mean? What does it mean to survive? A cable of blue fire ropes our bodies, burning together in the snow. We will not live to settle for less. We have dreamed of this all of our lives. There is so much in that. We will not live to settle for less. We have dreamed of this all of our lives. They're so strong, they just can't even be taken in a single reading. It's an idea that she repeats again and again in her poems of the strength of love, the way love and strength are intertwined. Okay. There's another one on a similar theme. Paula Becker to Clara Westhoff. I've heard this read many times by people other than Adrienne because it's a much loved poem. There's an explanatory thing. Let's see. These two people, Paula Becker and Clara Westhoff, became friends at Worpswede, an artist colony near Bremen, Germany, summer 1899. In January 1900, they spent a half year together in Paris, where Paula painted and Clara studied sculpture with Rodin. In August, they returned to Worpswede and spent the next winter together in Berlin. In 1901, Clara married the poet Rainer Maria Rilke. Soon after, Paula married the painter Otto Modersohn. She died in a hemorrhage after childbirth, murmuring, "What a pity." So this is Paula Becker speaking. This is Adrienne Rich imagining herself to be Paula, speaking a little bit before her death. The autumn feels slowed down. Summer still holds on here. Even the light seems to last longer than it should. Or maybe I'm using it to the thin edge. The moon rolls in the air. I didn't want this child. You're the only one I've told. I want a child, maybe, someday, but not now. Otto has a calm, complacent way of following me with his eyes, as if to say, soon you'll have your hands full. And yes, I will. This child will be mine, not his. The failures, if I fail, will be all mine. We're not good, Clara, at learning to prevent these things. And once we have a child, it is ours. But lately, I feel beyond Otto or anyone. I know now the kind of work I have to do. It takes such energy. I have the feeling I'm moving somewhere, patiently, impatiently in my loneliness. I'm looking everywhere in nature for new forms, old forms in new places. The plains of an antique mouth, let's say, among the leaves. I know and do not know what I'm searching for. Remember those months in the studio together? You up to your strong forearms in wet clay, I trying to make something of the strange impressions assailing me, the Japanese flowers and birds on silk, the drunks sheltering in the Louvre, that river light, those faces. Did we know exactly why we were there? Paris unnerved you. You found it too much, yet you went on with your work. And later we met there again, both married then, and I thought you and Rilke both seemed unnerved. I felt a kind of joylessness between you. Of course, he and I have had our difficulties. Maybe I was jealous of him to begin with, taking you from me. Maybe I married Otto to fill up my loneliness for you. Rainer, of course, knows more than Otto knows. He believes in women, but he feeds on us like all of them. His whole life, his art is protected by women. Which of us could say that? Which of us, Clara, hasn't had to take that leap out beyond our being women to save our work? Or is it to save ourselves? Marriage is lonelier than solitude. Do you know, I was dreaming I had died giving birth to the child. I couldn't paint or speak or even move. My child, I think, survived me. But what was funny in the dream was Rainer had written my requiem, a long, beautiful poem, and calling me his friend. I was your friend. But in the dream, you didn't say a word. In the dream, his poem was like a letter to someone who has no right to be there, but must be treated gently, like a guest, who comes on the wrong day. Clara, Why don't I dream of you? That photo of the two of us, I have it still. You and I looking hard into each other and my painting behind us. How we used to work side by side, and how I've worked since then, trying to create, according to our plan, that we bring against all odds our full power to every subject. Hold back nothing, because we were women. Clara, our strength still lies in the things we used to talk about, how life and death take one another's hands, the struggle for truth, our old pledge against guilt. And now I feel dawn and the coming day. I love waking in my studio, seeing my pictures come alive in the light. Sometimes I feel it is myself that kicks inside me. Myself I must give suck to, love. I wish we could have done this for each other all our lives, but we can't. They say a pregnant woman dreams of her own death, but life and death take one another's hands. Clara, I feel so full of work, the life I see ahead, and love for you, who of all people, however badly I say this, will hear all I say and cannot say. So again, her subject is love and work, love and strength. How are we doing for time here? Oh, goodness. Okay, I'll read this. It's my favorite poem of hers, Nights and Days. The stars will come out over and over. The hyacinths rise like flames. From the windswept turf down the middle of Upper Broadway, where the desolate take the sun. The days will run together and stream into years as the rivers freeze and burn. And I ask myself and you, which of our visions will claim us? Which will we claim? How will we go on living? How will we touch? What will we know? What will we say to each other? Pictures form and dissolve in my head. We are walking in a city you fled, came back to, and come back to still, which I saw once through winter frost, years back before I knew you, before I knew myself. We are walking streets you have by heart from childhood, streets you have graven and erased in dreams, scrolled portals, trees, 19th century statues. We are holding hands so I can see everything as you see it. I follow you into your dreams, your past, the places none of us can explain to anyone. We are standing in the wind on an empty beach. The onslaught of the surf tells me Point Reyes, or maybe some northern Pacific shoreline neither of us has seen. In its fine spectral mist, our hair is gray as the sea. Someone who saw us far off would say we were two old women, Norns perhaps, or sisters of the spray. But our breasts are beginning to sing together. Your eyes are on my mouth. I wake early in the morning in a bed we have shared for years, lie watching your innocent, sacred sleep as if for the first time. We have been together so many nights and days. This day is not unusual. I walk to an eastern window, pull up the blinds. The city around us is still on a clear October morning, wrapped in her indestructible light. The stars will come out over and over. The hyacinths rise like flames. From the windswept turf down the middle of Upper Broadway, where the desolate take the sun. The days will run together and stream into years as the rivers freeze and burn. And I ask myself and you, which of our visions will claim us? Which will we claim? How will we go on living? How will we touch? What will we know? What will we say to each other?
That was beautiful. Thank you for educating us about Adrienne Rich. You used the term love and work. And that's what Freud's last two words on his deathbed, love and work. And her writing is important to all of us. There's so much freedom. There's so much sagacity. She just it's personal, and yet it's much larger. Her vision is so large, and it just told in such a soothing way. And thank you for, letting us in and helping us understand her work much, much more. It's really been a revelation. And there's also a protective quality in her. It's not just for women, it's for all of us. And the strength and the knowledge that she has and the way she puts her poetry together is just really magnificent. And thank you. Here's Jennifer, Mary Ann, in case Jennifer would like to say a little bit.
I just want to say thank you so much. Really glorious reading. And I also love the fact that you shared, because I have felt this way in the past. There are women poets who seem to have gotten more notoriety because they have ended their own lives, instead of those that, ran through to a beautiful age of, what was it that you said? Drinking?
Just drunken old women poets.
Drunken old women poets. And, I'd love to hear more from the drunken old women poets. And I do understand that, it is human nature to take an additional look at where tragedy lies. And certainly someone choosing to take their own life is tragic. And the search for why and reason in that often will draw more focus on the art that they created. But all art has value. The points of view of people that manage those storms, I think, are more important. That's where our lessons should lie. So thank you for sharing that.
And the example should be of being survivors, if possible.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you both so much. It is 2:00. Harry, would you like to share what's up for next week?
Next week, there are two wonderful poets, Puma Pearl, a younger than me poet from New York City, and also Iris Berry from, she has a press, I think it's Punk Hostage Press here in LA, but they're both very vibrant poets. So I'm looking forward to that. And thank you once again, Mary Ann, and thank you, Jennifer, as always.